Dudes, welcome back. I got a very special guest today. With me is the legendary author and artist Tony Diterlizzi. Tony, welcome. Could you please give a summary to the audience as to who you are, what you've done?
Legendary! Wow,
Legendary.
I thought that happens after I die.
No, you've done it in your lifetime, bro. I think you've got some quite a lot of accomplishments under your belt. Lay it on us. Tell us about your who you are.
My life in short was I graduated art school in the early '90s, and I submitted to TSR, who was the publisher of Dungeons and Dragons, and I worked for Dungeons and Dragons for most of the '90s. Actually, I was a freelance illustrator, and I worked like Planescape and the regular Dungeons and Dragons game itself, and then that segued into work for Magic the Gathering. So I was an artist who worked on them all throughout the '90s and into the early 2000s. But my big dream and the thing that I do as my job now is I'm a children's book author and illustrator. Books for middle grade and younger readers. So I've done a lot of picture books. One of my books, the Spider and the Fly, won a Caldecott Award. And with Holly Black, I created the SpiderWick Chronicles series, which sold zillions and millions of copies and was made into a feature film way back when, and video games and Happy Meals and a lot of crazanity. And that's what I do. My job is making books. Many of my books have been bestsellers. My books are published all over the world. I am primarily my own author and illustrator. However, I have illustrated for other authors like Mo Willems. And I also have written books. I've only written one book and designed it for someone else, which was for Lucasfilm, who wanted me to take Ralph McQuarrie's original concept art and make a picture book out of it for young readers. So I did that quite a few years ago, but it's hopefully one that is far from over. And I'm happy to be here today to talk to you and talk to your audience, and I'll answer any questions you've got. Throw them at me.
So what you're saying is you're just getting started and you're really hopeful, right?
That's it. That's right.
No, that is quite an extraordinary career, and you're still a young man. You're still a young guy. And so, what I'm wondering, though, is you made this transition. You were an artist, a well-established artist for 10 years, working on Dungeons and Dragons, working on Magic the Gathering. And you transitioned. You transitioned into author and writer. You started making your own worlds based on stuff you had done, notes and stuff you had started when you were a kid, and a lot of that transition. I read a little about you, so but that transition to switch. Sometimes artists can feel really trapped in the role of being an artist, and I'm wondering, was that an easy transition for you, or was it people just loved your stories right away, or what? How did you break through that barrier? What was that transition like for you?
It definitely was a transition, and it definitely was a square one in my career. So if you can imagine, again, this is all under the caveat that this was 20 something years ago. So the world all the fields and the worlds have changed a little bit. Obviously, social media and things like that weren't part of the equation back then. But I'd spent many years working for Dungeons and Dragons and made a lot of connections and inroads in the tabletop gaming world. Some of my peers were definitely going off and doing work for video game companies, doing similar things that we would have done for role-playing games. And so a portfolio of mine from that era would have been chock full of fantasies, standard stock fantasy illustration, monsters, dragons, damsels in distress, wizards, all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't really translate to picture books. An art director can certainly look at your illustration and go, "Oh, this person's can obviously draw and paint, but I'm not quite sure, what to put you on." On the other hand, the thing that made me stand out somewhat in the field of role-playing games was my love of children's books, because it was always a dream of mine to write and illustrate my own children's books. And I was inspired by a lot of really old classic illustrators. It started with Norman Rockwell, but then artists like Brian Froud and Alan Lee led me down a road to, Arthur Rackham and the Robinson brothers and Ernest Shepard, who illustrated Winnie the Pooh, and a lot of really old classic illustration. And I infused a lot of that style in my gaming art, which at the time no one was really doing. And so I was a little betwixt and between, to be honest with you, Trent, because I wasn't doing these kind of testosterone fueled Frazetta styled big dudes with brazen dudes with giant axes and swords. I was doing more like spindly armed, kind of weird earthy characters. My favorite color was brown. It wasn't a lot of bright color in my art. I loved earth tones. So I had a mixed reaction with a lot of the art that I was doing in gaming, but I had a good sized fan base. People really liked it. I think because it was so different. The other thing I would add is I also didn't really paint. I wasn't really so much a painter as I was a drawer, and really looked at classical illustration. So most of my work in that era was pen and ink with like watercolor wash or ink washes over it.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe I can do children's books that look kind of like this style, this Arthur Rackham turn of the century style. And no, you can't, because no children's book publisher really wanted that style in their work. So when I think back on the transitionary period, for me, it was I had grown up and was living and went to art school down in South Florida, and my wife and I moved to New York City, and we did that so that she could pursue her career as a makeup artist, but so I could also literally go door to door and drop off my portfolio. It was still in the 90s. There was still the remnant of that system where you would go in on a Thursday and you'd drop your portfolio off at the front desk of a publisher, and you'd come back on a Monday, and you'd pick it up, and there'd be a a rejection letter or a thanks or whatever. So
it's before the internet, right? So it's before you could just send off the files or a link to your website. It's before the internet completely. So you're manually shipping this out or going over there and dropping it off, right? Getting color laser copies was a big honking deal. Those were expensive to get. You got them sparingly, and you would hand them out sparingly. You'd make a little folder and put them all in it and hand it out. So my early work that I did get in that transitionary period would have been book cover work. I remember doing some fantasy illustration work for Del Rey books, Warner Books, Rock. I did a cover to one of Peter Beagle's, the guy that wrote The Last Unicorn. I got to do a cover and some illustrations for him. And those projects were pretty small. They didn't pay particularly well. But here's the thing. Every time I got one of those little projects, I would go, hey, can I do what we call chapter headers or chapter openers? So, in a book, like think of Harry Potter, there's always that little tiny spot drawing that leads into the chapter. They most of the time, art directors and editors and publishers, they budget for that. They have to pay for that. But for a lot of those books, I would just offer to do it for free because I wanted to show what I could do. And I also wanted the stuff for my portfolio. Yeah, sure. So if I could draw like a cool castle or something that felt more in sync with children's books, I would do it. I figured I'm just laying groundwork to get my portfolio. And then I was marching double time. I mean, at nights and weekends, I'm making samples of art to go into kids' books, what I think they want to see. Yeah, and you're getting feedback along the way, and you're making connections, and you're meeting people that then before you know it, you're probably getting requests for your work on books from other writers, right?
It took a while. No, it was
really?
At that time, and I on one hand, I've talked to other artists of our age and stuff of like, would it have been easier or harder with the internet? And I don't know the answer, because yes, you have the ease of sending someone to your website, but so does 9 zillion other amazing artists who are way more talented than I ever was. So I think what really came into play, and I learned this during my years of working in gaming, you'd go to a convention like Gen Con, and you could go with your portfolio and walk from booth to all the other game companies, and you'd shake the art director's hand, you'd look the art director in the eye, and you'd say, hey, I love your game. I'd really love an opportunity to work with you. Here's my stuff. If you need, and that personal connection goes so far, Trent. Like, you know that. Like,
Yeah.
it's all about interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Even if your name is the only name on the front cover of a book, my name may be on the cover of a book. There's an entire team of people who work to make these books. So there was a lot of learning, on the job training, if you will, during those years, and transitioning into children's.
So certainly, if you want to get into an industry, spend time meeting people who are also in that industry, be of value, be of service to what their needs are, right? Like, that sounds like what you were trying to do. It's like, I want to become more valuable to these authors that are doing something that I want to do. I want to like meet people who are doing that. I want to get feedback so that I can be more effective, more useful, and create demand for your work even. And having that personable one-on-one time, which is tough during COVID right now, because we don't have Gen Con and whatnot. But you're right. When I think back to my opportunities in video game development, it was because of personal, like, one-on-one time with people. It's not just, I have had opportunities from the cold portfolio send in, I got into Blizzard from a cold portfolio send in. I just sent it in through they were looking for a concept artist, and nobody else with stylized work applied. I just happened to be like a lucky guy at that time who was applying for that role at a time when GTA was the most popular thing. So
I was going to say, but let me say, your resume probably looked good at that point.
At that point, I did have some experience, and so, but the break-in actually happened through person-to-person meeting with game developers. Because of some comic book work that I had done. They were comic book fans. They wanted to meet me, and they were like, "Hey, you want to work in video games?" I'm like, "Hey, of course. Yeah, that sounds good."
Yeah.
And it was a tough time for comics at the time. But my takeaway from what you're saying is get involved, be of high value to those people who are doing what you want to be doing. And I don't know how I feel about offering services for free, man. If you're a young guy, I think maybe sure. But if you got bills to pay and family, that's a tough thing for somebody to sacrifice, right?
It was. I mean, look, I was all those things. I was in my 20s, and I was like, I am going to do whatever it takes. This is the thing I want to do. I all the money I make for Dungeons and Dragons, moved to New York. I was like, and I figured the worst thing that could happen is I would fail and I'd move back to Florida. It was like, like, I got to try this. I got to go for it.
At what point was there a singular moment where you're just like, children's books, this is it? I don't want to make video games. I don't want to do more like, art services, art for hire. I don't want to do, art books or be like a gallery artist. I know you do some of that too, but like, at what point were you just so certain that like, this is where I'm going? Was it a moment where you feel like you made it, you had a big success with something, or was it someone who influenced and inspired you along the clear path of where you wanted to go?
It happened. I can tell you exactly when it happened. It happened my senior year in high school, and I was 16 years old.
Whoa,
I was about to turn 17. I went to a public high school down in Florida, as I said, and I had taken every art class I could take. I'd taken them all. It was for you in high school, but in Florida, popular kids were surfers or skaters or on the football team or the basketball team. What they weren't was a nerdy, gawky artist who loved drawing dragons and trolls and whatever else, right? I had taken every class, as I said, that my art teacher offered, and in my final semesters of school, my teacher took me under his wing during his planning period. One-on-one class, basically. He's like, I'm gonna grade papers, and what I want you to do is I want you to work on a project, and I want you to create something that will do two things. It'll help you get into a decent art school, and maybe, just maybe, help you get a scholarship to go to art school, because I grew up no money. Like, I had to put myself through college. My parents just didn't have the money to do it. So, I for about a week, I dilly-dallied. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. Finally, my teacher got a little frustrated with me. He said, listen, you need to go home, and Monday, when you come back to school, I need to know what your project is, because you need to get moving on it. So I went home that week, and I was thinking about, now I'm the oldest of three. I have a sister and I have a brother. My brother's about 9 years younger than me. And at the time, he was reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in class. They were reading it in school. And he and I were kind of talking about it, and we were looking at the old John Tenniel original. I had like a paperback with the John Tenniel drawings in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were reading it and talking about it. And I thought, man, it would be really cool to do like a version of Alice in Wonderland. We were also huge manga and anime. He was a big, huge, and still is to this day, a big anime fan. We were watching Robotech religiously.
Mm-hmm.
I think early Studio Ghibli, I think it was Nausicaa, but it was under a different name at the time. I don't even remember what it was, like the Valley of the Wind or something. Yeah, some other name. Yeah. Anyway, we were huge fans. He's like, dude, if you made Alice look like she was an anime character, like how cool would that be? Yeah. So we had all these ideas. I came in Monday and I said, I think I want to do drawings for Alice in Wonderland, and I kind of had done a couple little sketches of like the Mad Hatter. So my teacher said, this is a great idea. I want you to redesign all the characters, and then I want you to re-illustrate, do a bunch of key illustrations and hand them in at the end of the semester. So it'll be like a series of illustrations and your own take on this thing. Yeah. So I went nuts. I couldn't do, the days were not long enough. Yeah. I was obsessed. I drew all the time. Yeah. And I did all these drawings. I remember I was really into rapidographs at the time, which is horrible. And I did all these drawings in rapidograph. And then my let me use the Xerox machine. We Xeroxed them onto paper, and then we had Prismacolor markers, which are like Copics now. Yeah. And he had like a set of them in the class, and I was coloring them in these Prismacolor markers. And then my bedroom as a kid was, plastered in posters and lava lamps and flicker lights and all this, stuff that I would, go listen to my Pink Floyd records and the Doors and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and
you're speaking my language.
Out.
Yeah.
And so I had a big black light in my room that I would turn all the lights off and have the black light on. Mm-hmm. And my favorite thing to do is I would take a highlighter pen and draw in it because it glowed. Yeah. So I thought, I'm going to color aspects of this Alice in Wonderland art in highlighter pen. And I'm telling my dad about it. And my dad says, I think we can get a little black light bulb. And we literally went to like the hardware store, and he got this little tiny black light bulb and puts it in like a pen flashlight. Mm-hmm. So I go to school to hand this final project in, and we stapled it all together. I hand this book to my teacher, this little flashlight. And he's like, this is amazing. This is, A+. You really knocked it out of the park. But here's the thing, Trent. That's not what does it. That's not what does it.
It's not the glow-in-the-dark ink with the black light.
Then I put me in math class or science class. Talk to me. He goes, hey, glow-in-the-dark book. Can I see it? Like somebody would never normally have talked to me, and I hand him the book. And there was a crowd.
What?
Just everybody looking at this book. Yeah. I'm like, dude, this is so cool. So, cosm of high school, where all you want to do is be accepted.
Right.
Which is stupid, I know, but it at that time, it's your entire world.
Yeah.
For being completely and totally true to myself. I did who would go around high school and going, yeah, I'm thinking about doing some drawings for Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, right. Line up, ladies. You know what I mean? They'd be like, sure. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
And in this John Hughes stratified 80s high school where the jocks were the top and the surfers and, geeky artists were at the bottom, I got accepted by, people were like, you're an awesome artist. You're amazing. And I was like, I want to do kids books. Like, I was like, that's it. I want to tell story. I want to do my Alice in Wonderland. I want to do my stories. Yeah. And off I went. And it took me, over 10, 12 years to get there. But I got to work on Dungeons and Dragons in between, and I learned a lot along the way. But I just never let go of that the entire time. I just wanted to go back to that feeling of like which really, if you think about it, is like a gallery artist and like you're putting the art out there and you want people to love it.
Yeah.
It's like a pop song. You want people to adore it and want it and to own it. So that was my first taste of it.
Well, you're seeing like this expression of creativity from yourself based on something that you are fascinated with. And then as a reaction to that, you get the attention that you were craving. And of course, that's the formula right there, right? But also seeing that like there's heavy competition. You had to up your game, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so that challenge always, like, it sounds like it was the perfect blend of like a low level of challenge in the beginning. And then it becomes more and more progressively challenging as you get into competing with other artists out in college and outside in the workforce, right? And but you still, like, were you writing books while you were doing Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering cards? Were you
I've been writing since I was a kid, and it's all terrible. Even during my 20s, it's bad poetry.
Sure.
It's what I think a kid's book should be. It's lousy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I think me, when I would sit down and draw really from my imagination, and I don't know if it's the same for you, it's never like just a single static image. It's really, for me, a frame of animation and a story that's playing in my mind.
It's a movie. Yeah, you're just capturing a moment. Yeah. Yeah.
My mom said I used to make sound effects all the time when I was drawing. I'd be drawing Star Wars and go for dinosaurs. Do
you do voices for your characters when you're writing?
Absolutely.
I do that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, you have seriously upped your game. I mean, when you sent me this, I was like, first of all, this is your new book that just released last week. We get to promote that, let people know about it. I got it on Audible as well, right? Left a sweet review for you. But you also sent me all this cool stuff from like SpiderWick, and you got all these like sealed packages of your drawings. And I mean, your presentation is on point. You're a rock star, man. I was so inspired when I got this. I'm like, why am I still just doing little paperback things? Like I need stickers and postcards. Like, it's the presentation. You've even got like, I put it all nicely in there, but I'm kind of nervous. I was nervous to open that. You got such a nice presentation. Is that something that, I mean, from over your years of refining not just your art and your storytelling, but also, I mean, you're a presence in the young adult and middle grade book fantasy, the whole genre. Like your presence when you do a show, it's announced and like people know about it. Like, do you have a PR team? You said a lot of people work with you. What's that like? What's your setup like? How do you structure your business, and how did you come into learning how to present yourself so well? I mean, I feel like that's such an important part of establishing yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes. Well, thank you. And to be honest with you, my degree in art school I got was in design. It wasn't in illustration. I didn't think I'd be able to make it. I just thought a designer or a typographer, I'd have a better chance of getting an actual job out of school, and then I could chase my children's book illustration dreams and, at night. So I've always been a fan of ephemera.
Mm-hmm.
I love all that stuff. I mean, I don't know if you can see behind me, there's an entire shelf of Dover books, and it's all their borders and their clip art and all. I mean, I love all that stuff, and I love figuring out what a book is about. So, so that's part of your thing. So yeah, when I did a set of postcards, I thought, oh, it'd be cool if we had a cool envelope to put them in. And my wife's like, what if it was like, one of those like wax paper or like a vellum? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then we're like, where do we order that? Let's start at a wedding invitation. Like, they always use those, like, you know what I mean? There's always a conversation, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Angela, my wife, is such a huge part of the team. I mean, and she has been for over 25 years. I mean, she's been there. She was there before I was a children's book author. I met her when I was working on Dungeons and Dragons, and told her all my dreams of one day wishing I could, live in New York City and make books for kids. So, we do have a team. It's grown over the years. It didn't start out huge. It was, I worked with primarily publish at Simon & Schuster, books for young readers, and I work with those departments and those teams pretty closely. So you have an editor, you have an art director. Those are your immediate hands-on people when you're writing and illustrating a book. Editor helping you, obviously. Editor will oversee the entire book, but their primary function is to work with the text and the story, etc. But to add to that, augment it, I have beta readers that I also bring on and pay and hire to also edit before the manuscript even goes to the publisher, so I can figure it out. An art director who works for years over at Simon Schuster, so she's doing all the layout and the design, and she and I will go back and forth on the typography. And then you have other divisions. You have division that handles the PR. You have a marketing division that makes a lot of those things like you're talking about, and has a budget for ads or sending you on tour or whatever they're going to do. You have a school and library division that reaches out to schools and libraries so that your books can make it into those parts. Making a children's book isn't just you publish it and you put it on Amazon, or if you're fortunate you get it in Barnes and Noble. It's got to get into the schools where kids are actually being walked into a library and shown, like, here's the new Wimpy Kid book, here's the new Rick Riordan book. Like, you've got to be in that mix.
Right. And that happens through your publisher. They're kind of tackling a lot of that. So that's that's awesome that you've got a lot of people that are counting on you then. Do you feel that pressure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, I've been doing it now for 20 years. So,
yeah,
once you hit certain successes, you're advanced and you sell more money, you sell more books, you make more money. Yeah. And then your advance is based on the amount of books you sold last.
What was it like coming out of SpiderWick, seeing your ideas on the big screen? And forgive me if this is a question you've asked 100 times, but more specifically, I want to know about the pressure you must have felt coming off of that to write your next book. Was that, or was it just sort of like, oh, I got like 10 more of these? Like, I don't know. Like,
well, I'm definitely a log jam of story. Like, I've got, it's just one story after another for me. I've got a lot of stuff that I've been working on now for decades that I'm just slowly refining. And, we just kind of go through and go, all right, which one do we want to do next? All right, let's do this one next. This one feels right. Let's go with this one. SpiderWick, when the film came out, we were in the middle of on the sequel series for SpiderWick at that time. But I was also working on predecessor to Kenny and the Book of Beasts, which was Kenny and the Dragon. That came out during that whole era as well. Experience overall, just to see the book to film was surreal. I know that's a lame answer, but it was, the short of it was, I had pitched this idea. I want to explain how it interlocks a little bit, and I'll try not to be too long-winded about it, but I did a couple picture books. They did okay. They didn't do great, but they didn't do bad. Enough where the publisher kept hiring me. I wasn't making a ton of money. It was definitely, I had to do freelance work to augment my income at that point, living in New York City.
Yeah.
But my third picture book, The Spider and the Fly, made it on the bestseller list. And when that happened, it wasn't just my editor now. Now other people higher up were like, oh, what else has this guy got? What else can he do? So my editor, I came in for a meeting and he said, they're really excited about your next book. What do you want to do? If you could do anything, how long do you wait to hear that question?
Yeah, I
know what I mean? Like, you dream of that question.
Yeah.
I thought, what would 10-year-old Tony want?
Yeah.
30-something-year-old Tony could make.
Yeah.
And I remembered my love of Dungeons and Dragons and Brian Froud and Alan Lee's Fairies and the Dark Crystal, and also being a person who loved being outdoors and camping and bird watching and seashell collecting and insect collecting and learning about nature. And I had all these little golden field guides that I, would buy at the local dollar store. And I thought it'd be cool. I had made over one summer a field guide to dragons and trolls and things like that. I want to make a field guide to the realm of fairies. So it's not so much folklore as it's a scientific kind of look at it, like a John James Audubon who can see into the world of fairy.
Yeah.
So I spent some time and mocked up the book, and I brought it in to show them, and they were impressed. And they came back to me and said, we had a huddle, and we're like, we love this book, but it's really expensive, and we don't think we can sell it. But we're interested in the story behind this field guide. We're interested in, like, who's the guy that made this field guide? And I'm like, oh, well, that's Arthur Spiderwick, and he blah, 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 right? And they're like, see, we want that story.
That's the story.
And so we started developing what would become the backstory and the mythology of Spiderwick. And at a certain point, we realized this is two stories. This is the field guide, and this is a story about the field guide.
Yeah.
And when it started to become more and more apparent that it was going to be either two books or maybe even a series, I knew that I couldn't do all that work. There was too much work for me to do. I mean, I hadn't been making books for 5 years at that point.
Yeah.
And Holly Black had been helping me do all the research and homework on the big field guide. And, Angela had helped her get her first novel, Tithe, published. And we were very close. And I suggested that could I work with Holly on the writing of these books. And Simon & Schuster we had to write a sample book. We wrote a test book, an audition, if you will, that we sent in to be like, this is what it would be like. And Holly was the one who was like, I think modern day kids need to find the field guide. It can't just be about an old guy from 100 years ago. I think we need to have like regular, normal kids, so you can see all the things slowly growing, but also me not taking no for an answer and trying to find a resourceful solution to it. And, so we flip-flopped it. They said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy your stories about the Spiderwick kids. And then when that little series of 5 books is done, we're going to do your big field guide. If the sales are good. And fortunately for us, the sales were phenomenal. They were off the chart.
Well, it sounds to me like you're always coming from a place of what your younger self would love to see.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's, I think, a big difference between like corporate game development, or from my experience of working in like where I'm hired to be an artist or create IPs for other people. A lot of times they're like, hey, the demographics and statistics show that it should be this type of thing, and these dinosaurs are in right now, so you better create a dinosaur thing. And you seem like you're really just coming from a place of, like I said, that younger version of yourself. Like, what would that kid just lose their top over? That same kid who freaked out about the idea of redesigning Alice in Wonderland, know? And I think that's so key to what the charm is that's in your stories. I think the kind of relatability and the charm in your stories, it doesn't feel like you're just tailoring it to whatever the trend is, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You can't in publishing. It moves too slow.
Really?
So, oh my God, yeah. So even if, like, I don't know, what's pandemics are on trend right now.
Sure.
Do you know, like, in the next 2 years, we are going to get just tons of pandemic books, because even if we write it now, even if we sell it right now, you're gonna hand it in next year, and it's gonna be published the following year.
Yeah. Wow. So it takes a long time for you to craft a story. Let's talk a little bit about your process, if you don't mind me transitioning into that.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I'm curious because you're an artist. You do a lot of drawings. I counted it. There's 60 drawings in here, drawn, I believe in pencil, I think. And so do you do all the artwork after you've written the story and you've got it all just fine-tuned, or do you draw every day and write a little bit every day? What's your day-to-day and your overall scope, and how long does it take you to do something like a Kenny and the Beasts, the Book of Beasts?
That's a year. You're looking at a year about of writing and illustration. Yeah, it's about a year. So you're on to me, Trent. That's definitely, it starts with the characters. And in that case, it's Kenny, and who's the main protagonist, the rabbit.
Yeah.
And, I'm drawing him, and I'm drawing, and if you're starting out from scratch, I mean, that book's a sequel, so I kind of know the characters a little bit. But if you're starting from scratch, you're drawing, you have this idea of a book, a time-traveling kid or whatever, whatever, and you're drawing this character, and you're trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
Right? And as you're drawing them, I don't know if you do this, but I'll put little notes like, loves to, vegetarian.
Yeah.
Or loves dogs. Always wears mismatched socks, or you're just trying to figure out who they are and what they're about.
Yeah.
And as you're doing that, the story is starting to spin out of them, right? You're starting to figure out, because you've got some idea, right? You've got a premise generally when you start. You're like, time traveling kid or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then you're like, okay, so at this point you may not necessarily know who the audience is, but you need to figure it out quickly. You need to figure out, because especially in children's publishing, are you making a picture book where the book is being read to the child? Are you doing what we call ready readers, where the child is just learning to read, and then so the vocabulary is very specific? Are you doing chapter books? Are you doing middle grade novels? Are you doing a YA novel? Like, it's all
because
right.
This one is seems like a very different audience than Wondla, for instance. Like, not very different, but like Wondla is for those maybe like 16-year-olds, I would say, like middle grade, I guess you'd say. Is that right or no? Am I mistaken about that?
10 to 12.
Really?
12-year-old.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, but this is a beefy story. This must have taken you 3 years, by the way. There's 3 of these.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was tired when I was done with that one.
Yeah.
I was really beat. Middle grade, but Kenny would be on the younger middle grade. Like, 8 years old would be reading Kenny and the Dragon.
Okay.
Wandla's on the higher end.
Okay.
However, to your point, in both books, I try to write about philosophical things that I'm thinking about as a 50-year-old man,
right.
as a father,
Mm-hmm.
as a person living in the 21st century, thinking about technology and the natural world and coexistence and all. I'm still processing all that stuff. Actually, for me, these stories have some kind of reflection of something that's going on in my life at the time. It's like, I'm going to write about this thing, but subconsciously there's stuff going on in the back that's ruminating in the back of my brain, and I'm trying to figure all of it out in story, on page, with pictures and talking rabbits and aliens and stuff.
Yeah, and how do you distill down those complex ideas about life and humanity because you're a storyteller, you're like tribes would have this, where they would talk about their experience to the rest of the tribe to teach them lessons, and that's the essence of what stories, I think, are. And so I always thought it was amazing how Dr. Seuss, even for a very young children's book author, but he would take very complex ideas about humanity and simplify them down into these very simple terms. And so you're always probably looking at things through that lens of what is the best way to almost manifest this idea through these characters, through their personality traits or what they believe versus what somebody else believes, in simple terms that are relatable to those. Either in the sense of the characters, it's through their world, it's through their eyes. It's like what matters to them. But that's something that was already established as something relatable to a young person who's reading it, right? If they've already attached to a character, they're relating to what that character wants. And so they're going to be able to relate to the overall complex issue through the perspective of what that character wants. Maybe that's
right.
an overcomplicated way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you have to care about the character, right?
Yeah.
If you don't care about the main character, you're done for. I mean, I think that's it. So, I mean, we have to care about Harry Potter living under the stairs at the Dursleys in order to go with him to Hogwarts and the 9 zillion other things he does. You've got to care about him.
Yeah.
You got to care about Frodo and Bilbo before they leave the Shire. These are it's Luke Skywalker. Like you have to front load those characters with appealing traits.
Yeah.
In order to sympathize with them or empathize with them or feel a little bit like, okay, I can follow this character. But you're talking also a lot about theme and what the theme of the book is. And that is everyone's different and every book is different. And sometimes I don't know the theme until I get almost to the end. I go, oh, that's what this book is about. And then you go back and you rewrite the whole darn thing, but with a better understanding of what the story is about. The new book is about change. It's about leaving elementary school and going into middle school. And when I thought back on that time in my life, I was very anxious because of the changes that happen. You're going to a new school. Some of your friends are not going to the same school you're going to. Your friends are changing. Your body is changing. Your dynamic, perhaps, with your family. Maybe you have more responsibility now than you had before. Everything, some of your friends that were your best friends in elementary school are now not your friends anymore. They're hanging out with new friends. And I was thinking about all this. And at the time, my daughter was getting ready to start middle school and it all came rushing back. And I was like, I know what this book is about. This is a story about change and how the hero learns to cope with change, but in the end also realizes that he is changing and causing change as well.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's from the inside looking out. He doesn't realize what it looks like from the outside looking in. And which no one does when you're in elementary school. You're not thinking about how other people view you. So it's thinking about those things and then going, okay, well, how do we show change? How do we do that? And then all right, let's start with his family. What can we change about his family? They're rabbits. Let's give them 12 sisters. They're rabbits. That's gonna suck, right? That's gonna be a big change. His best friend, let's send her off to a different school. That's gonna, he's looking forward to her, might even have feelings for her.
Right.
Oh man, now I don't get to be in class with you. You're going to some other school. You have new friends now. You know what I mean? You just start layering it and layering it and layering it until the character, in this case, till the character breaks. And then learns, changes, and comes back to the starting place of the story, but as a different character.
It's never
evolved.
For my own part, I can agree. It's never. I've only written a few short novels, but it's never what I set out to do in the beginning. I plan out my beats, and I'm so sure that that's the big clincher and the moment where the character is going to have that big moral lesson. And it's never that. It's always halfway through the book, I'm like, whoa, this is really something that's happening to me in my own life that I didn't even realize. My subconscious mind is putting this character is this part of myself, or this character is that person that I know that I still feel hurt by, or whatever it was that I was going through, and it manifests itself. Or it's there's a lot of intense things going on in the world right now, and so I imagine we're going to get some great stories out of this one.
You're probably right.
Because I do feel like underneath and behind it all, most people want to be the hero of the story. They want to be the good guy, And so I think we all have a story to tell. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about writing is that opportunity to figure out things that you're going through in your own mind in the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an adventure of self-discovery. Each book is an adventure of self-discovery as well. Yeah.
And I think that the stories that I've always cherished that I've read are not stories that really have a moral or a hard message. They just ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
And it's up to you, the reader, to determine how you feel about it or what your takeaway is from it. So I remember this.
Interesting. Yeah.
I was thinking about The Hobbit, because my daughter loves The Hobbit. I read The Hobbit when I was her age, and my mom read all the Tolkien stuff. And I remember talking to my mom about The Hobbit, and I was like, I wonder why its appeal is so strong. I hadn't quite cracked it. I'm like, I love it. I can't quite put my finger on what it is about it that I love. And my mom she just kind of looks at me and laughs. She goes, you don't know what that story is about? And I go, I get the journey. She goes, the smallest of us can make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like,
that is a powerful story. That really resonates. Yeah.
That's what that book, right? I got the bumps, right? I'm like, oh my God, that's what it is. That's what that story, that's what resonates with everybody when you read a story like that. And he drives it home over and over. I'm not a thief.
Right.
I don't know what I'm not a burglar. I don't burgle. But it didn't.
He did take the ring though.
He did. That is true.
But that's the human part, right?
He did take him and he outsmart.
Because we all fail. We all struggle with our own ideal self. What we tell ourselves we all struggle with that a little bit too, right? But you're absolutely right. It's he was pure of heart initially, innocent, completely so innocent, right? The hobbits themselves by nature, non-threatening, not involved in wars, not interested in any takeover of Middle Earth, not interested in big things going on outside. In fact, pushing it away even. Yeah. But then getting pulled into it. Yeah.
Food and drink. The good things in life.
The good things.
Bon vivants. That's all they are, and that's what I, and the thing is though, again, and obviously, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I know the general knowledge that everybody else knows. I mean, I'm no doubt that World War I affected the writing of that, and how it manifests in that story, to me at least, is his adventure still comes at a cost. It costs him a piece of his soul.
Yeah.
He does save the
Oh,
world.
right. Yeah.
But
they say you can never go
who
back.
he is. But you can't go back.
You can't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It transforms you. So, I mean, talk about change. One of the things that when I used to draw comics, I would just write whatever I was feeling. It was about a high school kid. He was like chasing after this girl. He could escape to a dream world where he could make anything. But it was really just like you said. It was like poetry. It was like, just whatever was kind of on my mind. I was fascinated with other places in the world, so I'd write about them from the view of somebody who'd never been there. So how useful is that? Not very. But then I started studying like Save the Cat. I started studying Stephen King's on writing. There's legendary book Story by
Robert E.
Robert McKee. Yeah, I mean, there's some legendary books about formulas and structure. Obviously, you're familiar with them. How do you feel about structures? Do you turn to the structures and formulas when you're in a bind, or do you say no structures? I write off this by the seat of my pants. I'm winging it until it just like. Or do you rely on your intuition, or do you rely on formulas? Is what I'm trying to say. I
think I want to maybe make an analogy that's similar to art, where do you do your thumbnails out of your head, or do you have reference in front of you? You know what I mean? I mean, I start with thumbnails out of my head, and if I don't know how to draw a thing, then I go get reference. Like, how does this gun barrel look? Or I'm trying to think of, like, for Overwatch or something, like, let me look at motorcycle helmets, or things like that I feel like would be pertinent to the design. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's very gestural, it's very shape driven, it's very line and silhouette driven, and I'm just doing abstract shapes and just thinking about how a character could occupy that silhouette, and then start doing homework and figuring out how to flesh the character out, so to speak. And for me, my writing isn't much different. To your point, I want to write it from here first, and from here first, knowing that it's flawed and it's going to need work and refinement. And then as time get to a point that I'm like, let me look at some toolboxes to see what might spark it. And sometimes it's if I'm stuck. And sometimes, I mean, it can come at critical points. I've got 3 that I look at fairly regularly. The rest I've gotten rid of. The 3 I look at, and really Save the Cat's at the bottom of that. I just don't look at it as much as I used to. So here, I'll grab them for you, actually. I've got 20 master plots is one. Okay. And I like 20 master plots because it breaks down general plots that we use in Western storytelling. And this is great if you've got an idea. So go back to our example of our time-traveling kid. Is it an adventure plot? Is it a quest plot? Is it a mystery? Is it a, et cetera, et cetera? Is it a romance? Is he going back to find the girl he loves? All those kinds of things. That it can help set you off in a direction. It's great. It's real short reading, which is really fun. The other one, and this is it's a good thing and a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So everyone knows the Joe Campbell hero's journey, Hero of 1,000 Faces, and that stuff is great. And obviously, from our generation, it was made popular by George Lucas's, proclamation that this was a huge influence on the Star Wars trilogy, which then led people to think, oh, well, if I tap that same myth building, I therefore will create my own Star Wars. Sure. Doesn't quite work that way. However, I'm fascinated with mythology and stuff, and so the writer's journey by Christopher Vogler, really breaks down that quest plot and that Hero of 1,000 Faces, and it's definitely applied to screenwriting and storytelling. He uses a lot of modern day examples of film and books to explain aspects of it, and you can learn archetypes and stuff. But it's dangerous in that there's so much there that you can start checking boxes, and that's when your writing will become formulaic. Yeah. So that's and you see that, right? We've all gone and watched a movie, and you're like, okay, and then this happens, and get ready for this part, and this happens, because they're looking at this too closely. It may not be the screenwriter; it could be a studio executive that's pounding it into them. But that's the danger of some of those types of books. They're great toolkits, but I would definitely use a word of caution in using them.
My first novel, I wrote it in 20. When I say novel, it's a 30,000 word book, and I wrote it in 2015. And then I read a couple of books about writing, and I rewrote it in 2016. And then I read a few more books, and then I rewrote it in 2017. And it's like, just move on, man. Just finish it and move on to the next things, because I was so obsessed with the idea that I was doing it wrong. When, in a sense, because I had done so many comics the wrong way. But I also realized by my third or fourth book, it's like, you got to know when to get back on the rails when you need help, but throw those training wheels off when you're really making something that's powerful and meaningful, that has a personal sense of expression. And I'm not nearly as accomplished as you, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, when do you feel like you're pretty sure you're gonna need some help? You're gonna need to go back to the formulas, and when do you rely on that intuition?
Well, listen, first thing, I go back and read stuff I wrote a couple years ago, and I roll my eyes. It's I look at the art, and all I see are the words, Trent. I mean,
do you have a lot of regrets about that?
Well, case in point, when I worked on the new Kenny book, the Kenny and the Book of Beasts, I reread Kenny and the Dragon. I don't reread my stuff often. I usually, once it's done and out the door, it's out the door. I don't want to look at it, unless I'm signing it for somebody. So I reread it, looked at the art, and I called my editor up and I said, hey, listen, any chance I could, maybe redo some of the illustrations in this book and maybe edit, just do an updated edit? And he's like, no, it is, don't, no, moving forward, we're making new books, not going back and adjusting old books. He goes, and that's, I don't know if you want to mess with that. Like, it's part of your growth, And so to your point about your book that you wrote 3 times, I would have done the same exact thing. But I do think that you, certain point, you move on. The scariest part, but the most exhilarating part, is having someone else read it and really giving you honest feedback. And it's hard. It's never easy. It never gets easier either. It never does.
It's also, I know, right? It's like, that's like art too. The competition's always getting better. The tools are always getting more advanced, and it never gets easier. And that's actually a good thing, because it means that you're going to really be striving to do your best. Like, let me just say, you've made it, right? Like, I don't know how, I don't know what you could possibly dream of next, but like, you still seem to have that pressure. Like, you still want to write the best story you can write, and you can still look at your old stuff and go, it's not as good as I would have liked, right? So, like,
absolutely.
I want to know, like, what are your big dreams? What's driving you now? Like, do you still dream of, like, I can't wait to see Wondla on the big screen? Is that even a goal at all for you? Or are you just like, no, I want to win a certain kind of award? Or is it just that you want to dazzle, an audience? Like, what is your big goal right now? What are you striving for?
Well, those are great goals. I think, but I have to ask myself, realistically, what my goal is. So if my goal was to have a movie made, then I wouldn't write a book. I'd go try to get a movie made. You know what I mean? Like, I would move in that thing. That's real. I mean, there's certainly people who make books with the intention of, like, now I'm going to go sell it and make a movie. And some people pull that off, but it's tough. It's hard. I mean, a lot of my stuff is in development to be made into television and movies. I don't know if it'll ever happen. I'm hopeful, but I can only do as much as I can do, and then at the end of the day, I write and illustrate books. That's what my day job is that I'm focusing on. Awards for me, I mean, I'd be lying if I said they don't mean anything to me. I mean, who doesn't like getting an award, being told about how amazing they are? But again, they don't. I don't have as much stock in that as I did when I was younger.
Sure.
It could be, 20-year-old Tony, it would have meant a lot more to him than 50-year-old Tony. Yeah. But that said, I haven't won a lot of awards in my entire career. Like, it's not a lot of awards. I mean, I won a Caldecott honor. I didn't win the medal. I just won the silver. That's it in children's. I never won the Spectrum Award for fantasy illustration. I've never won a Society Award. I've won the Peace of Mind Award. I'm happy. I have peace of mind. I get paid to do a thing I love.
Yeah.
That's the award. That's the reward of doing that kid version of me living in Florida who was like, maybe one day I could make a living drawing
Yeah.
and raising dogs.
Yeah.
Like, and take care of my family by telling fantastical stories and drawing pictures of aliens and robots and rabbits and dragons. That's it, man.
And you own it. It's not something that somebody else is telling you what to draw all the time, or that it's something that somebody will change into something else. Did you feel maybe this is a personal, you don't have to answer this, but when you did SpiderWick, did you feel that there were liberties taken with the film that were not in line with what your vision for it was at all?
I mean, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a process. But a movie has to do different things than a book has to do. I mean, you're taking 5 books that are roughly 500 pages total, and you're turning it into 120 pages of screenplay, and a 3-act structure on a budget, because now where I'm just like, I'm going to draw this because it looks cool and this is going to be out. Well, they got to build it and make it and animate it and cast it and all that. There's a lot more, and there's hundreds of people involved and a budget, and so that part of the process, you have to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy. But that's part of it. You have to let it go. And
were you biting your lip while you're watching them film it, or
fortunately I was, Holly and I were both participatory consultants. That's really what we were. I mean, we consulted on the scripts. Sometimes they listened to us, sometimes they didn't. The special effects were handled by Industrial Light and Magic and Phil Tippett Studios. I flew out to Industrial Light and Magic and spoke with them, and they went, yeah, okay, well, we're going to go do the thing we're going to do. And then I went to Phil Tippett, and he's like, dude, what? We love you, man. What do you want to, we're in. Like, you know what I mean? So 2 completely different experiences on that. Got to put a wish list together of the cast, and they listened. You know what I mean? I mean, Arthur Spiderwick was played by David Strathairn, and David Strathairn was the top of my list.
No kidding.
And they love that idea.
Awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Can you imagine if you could tell your 10-year-old self that you'd be doing that?
Nuts.
Wow.
It's off so you go on the little ride and then you get off at the end.
Yeah.
So the part that's weird is you come, they filmed it up in Montreal, just a few hours north of us here in Massachusetts. I'm in Amherst, so I'm in the western part of the state. So we would just drive up on the weekends and go watch them do the principal photography and stuff.
Yeah.
And, they built the house and the cast is there and they're on sound stages and we're just hanging out with them. I just was like, I just want to be here and be part of it. Just experience it. I'm the guy who still buys the Blu-ray because I want all the behind the scenes of how they made Blade Runner or how they did Star Wars or how they did Harry Potter. Like, I love all that stuff.
Oh, the Lord of the Rings appendices. Whew. If you're an artist, you have to have that. You have to. There's no excuse. So good. Get it on Blu-ray. You probably get it for cheap now.
Yeah, totally.
It's like 20 hours of just, here's why we put that etching in the axe. There's every symbol and every little metal piece. And it's just such a treasure for a concept artist or for a world builder. And that's like, I'm finding as a concept artist working in games, transitioning into doing, writing books, I want to do it like a concept artist. I'm like, nah, dude, this castle was built by these people and they're tied together through this. And it's like I'm weaving the story between everything. And it's not all that dissimilar, but I find myself leaning more towards the art side more often than the writing, even though I love writing dialogue a lot to expand on or imply about the universe, the bigger universe. I don't want to drone on about my books. I want to talk about your books.
No, it's fine. I mean, that kind of world building, I do that. I mean, I think the danger and the trick is you need to build the corral big enough to hold the story. And you don't need to go. What happens a lot of times is you fall in love with the world building. You're like, but let me tell you about the land far away and the peoples who created.
But that's not about that.
The antagonist. I don't need to know. It's not part of it. Cut it out, save it for the sequel.
Yeah.
Move
especially especially for younger audiences, right? It's about the relationship between the characters and what that character's feeling, and whether the reader can relate to that. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
But I do love that moment. If you can create that moment where the reader goes, ooh, I want to know more about that city built on the back of a giant, you know, or like, oh, you know what I mean?
Sure.
I like the wonder. Sure. I've recently I do my own audiobook recordings, and I was reading out my whole novel, my next Kung Fu fantasy adventure book, to my wife. And there were so many points where she's like, what? Whoa. And like that reaction is that's what makes it worth it, you know. And even if she's just, you know, trying to make me feel good, I appreciate it. I like it. And that's,
that sounds like a keeper, Trent.
Yeah. Well, no. I consider her my writing partner as well. You have a motto that you have on your website. You have it on all of your branding materials, on all of your books. Never abandon imagination.
Yeah.
Tell me about where that came from and why it's on everything that you do.
I mean, I think you probably know the answer already. I mean, again, a high school kid who loved drawing Mad Hatters and Cheshire Cats, and imagining being able to do that for a living, probably not much different than the things you probably dreamed and imagined, and probably saw. So again, I mean, high school, there were artists that were better than me. Definitely by the time I got to art school. I mean, you're a big fish in the little pond of high school, and then I get to art school, and there's hundreds of people that are amazing, just unbelievably talented, and you know, and they fall away, as you know. And I just was like, and then I got out of art school, and there's so many times I could have just thrown in the towel. You know, there were so many times the answer was no. I really can't impress that upon your viewers enough, that, you know, my history now is truncated in the minutes and time that we're talking, but this took years. And even when we lived in New York and I was doing those portfolio drop-offs, that was like over a year of just going and dropping and going and dropping and no and no and no thank you, and that's great, but maybe next time. And then the 50th person said, hey, I like your stuff, let me give you a shot. You know what I mean? And I just didn't abandon that notion, that thing that fueled me, the thing I still derive so much joy from, which was drawing imaginary worlds and imaginary characters that told kind of relevant stories.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's you say that it's a message for the audience. It's really hitting home with me too. You put so much work into making a novel. You put so much work into making a story. And sometimes it feels like you're screaming into the void. And it's like, no, you just have to get better. And you have to not give up. And you can't abandon it, because there's like, what would you do without that? Like, I think it's easier to quit. It's really easy to quit. And,
you know, it's so funny. We showed our daughter League of Their Own for the first time. The baseball movie with Tom Hanks. There's no crying in baseball. That movie.
Yeah.
And at the very end, Gina Davis's character is, I don't know if you remember this movie well. They're getting ready to go to the playoffs, or the final. Like they're kind of their version of you know, the playoffs. And Gina Davis's character's husband comes home from the war, and she goes home. And Tom Hanks is like, wait, we're in like the final games. You know what I mean? Yeah. And she's like, it's just too hard. And he's like, of course it is. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Right.
That's it. That is, I saw that and my eyes welled up, because I'm like, that is what this life is like for me. It is it never gets easy. Even now, doing it for years and years, there are lots of times where like it just doesn't pan out. It doesn't work out. You work for a year on a book and it's not a bestseller and it doesn't sell. You work a year on you fart out a book in like 6 months and that thing sells like crazy. You can't predict it. You don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's,
you got to show up every day. Yeah.
You know, the writing is long. It's an isolated existence. I mean, I'm down here. I mean, you're essentially looking at what it would be for me, right? It would be just me just typing on my keyboard, looking at it, you know, thinking about it, reading it, and for 6 months.
Yeah. But you're I mean, you have social skills. You obviously aren't locked away in a cave completely. I feel like when I lock myself, when I'm writing and I'm doing too much art at the same time, yeah, I will lock myself out from people. This whole lockdown thing that we're going on and through is not all that different for me.
No,
my life isn't all that different. Only difference is actually, I'm reaching out to more people because they're more willing, more open to talk with me. And speaking of which, I don't want to take up your whole day. But I want you to know what you've done, what you've accomplished, inspires me a lot. I feel like that's something that my audience should, the people who tune into my channel, I think it's so valuable what you shared with us today. I think that your journey has been extraordinary. I think that your perspective, your attitude is extraordinary. I think it's a great message. And I'm so pleased that you took a brief moment. Well, it's been an hour now. I'm so pleased that you took an hour that I got an hour of your time. I'm so grateful for that. Tony, you're a legend. You are. And I hope that you'll come back and visit us on this channel at some point, sometime in the future.
Oh, I'd be happy to come back. It was really my pleasure. I mean, you had great questions. A lot of times when you're interviewed as an author illustrator, it's like you get the same questions over and over. You do get how long does the book take, but then you're like, what medium is it? Like what do you draw with, and where do you get your ideas from and stuff? And you're like, but to get a little more into the actual nuts and bolts of the behind it, like what the day to day is like and how I got here from point, because that was always a mystery to me. I don't know how the people, I don't know how Brian Froud did it or Alan Lee did it. I don't know how they got there. And, I think you'd be surprised just asking questions, first of all, to people like, in a world when we can all get together again and someone's at a convention, I would go meet people and I just ask them really simple questions. And sometimes they would give you an answer and sometimes they wouldn't, but.
Well, you open the floodgates, man. You're going to get an email from me like every other day. No, but if I could just train right under your tutelage. I'd yes, Tony, like that. Okay, Tony, I'll do it however you want me to do it. Because I think you're a master of the craft, and your journey, your path, it's been extraordinary. So thanks, Tony, for stopping by, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.